After playing the open beta of Overwatch, I made a video of the main issues I had with the game. This video is a follow-up to that, but you don't have to watch the previous one before this. In this video, I'm going to discuss the problems Overwatch has when played at a higher level, such as in tournaments or even just in the top end of the ladder. I'll try to focus on more fundamental design issues with the game mechanics themselves, rather than superficial things such as the ranked format being awful. Please keep in mind that a lot of this criticism is completely irrelevant to lower level play. But then again, also remember that to incompetent enough players, even tic-tac-toe or rock paper scissors is a complex battle of wits. With that out of the way, let's talk me. I don't usually believe in introducing myself before making a point. But because of the lovely comments from the audience of my last video, I believe it is in order to establish what kind of experience I'm making these points on. Post-release, I've played Overwatch for about 150 hours or so, most of that casually with friends in quick play. I prefer hitscan heroes like Soldier, Widowmaker and Zarya. In ranked queue, I'm sitting at 68 rating with a carrier high of 72, which puts me somewhere in the top 1% of players. I'm not outstanding by any stretch, but I think I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this game. In case you want to look at my profile, you should see an overbuff link on top of the video right about now. In my previous video, the main points I mentioned were the following. 1. The game doesn't really stand out as an FPS, nor does it stand out as a MOBA. By MOBA, I mean a game with numerous heroes and various abilities that emphasizes counterpicking and team synergy. 2. The game doesn't reward skillful play enough. 3. Ultimates are much too powerful, which makes the gameplay completely revolve around them. I still agree for the most part with all of these points. There is one point I mentioned in the video that I do not agree with, and that is the claim that the game is like a more casual TF2. It is not. I wish it was. Overwatch is a poor shooter game because there are only a handful of characters that really require mechanical skill. Say what you want about team strategy or game sense being important, mechanical skill is still the #1 factor that keeps an FPS game interesting to play and watch. All shooters require game sense, and all team-based shooters require team strategy, but also requiring and rewarding mechanical skill is what makes for exhilarating outplays and clutches. There is a relative absence of this kind of moments in Overwatch, making it a stable but unexciting ride. What I mean by Overwatch not standing out as a MOBA is that the whole counterpicking shtick just doesn't really work. In practice, most games are just a matter of which of the two teams can better cheese the 3 or 4 heroes that are overpowered in that particular situation. There are many mirror matchups, and in games where hero stacking is allowed, a lot of teams consisting of a grand total of 3 heroes. Some may argue this is a balance issue and completely fixable, but the meta has seen some drastic changes through the game's history and there hasn't been a single point where it was exciting. Finally, there's the ultimates. Like I said before, they are way too powerful in comparison to everything else. Games basically boil down to 2 parts. A lull where everyone spams a choke point while building up their ultimate, and then a massive AoE fuckfest of a teamfight where everyone presses Q and hopes that the enemy team can't muster a response. The game would honestly be better off if most of the ultimates were completely removed. Every one of these points is just a symptom of fundamentally poor game design deeper down. There's a pretty big strategic element that is almost completely absent in key areas of Overwatch, and its absence is rather ironic in a game that touted counterpicking as one of its key features. That element is the concept of counterplay. Sure, it exists in some ways, but most of it is a simple scissors beat paper type of deal. It's like they were so focused on implementing a 20-item game of rock paper scissors that they didn't even realize that counterplay should also exist outside of direct ability interactions. Many of the ultimates are possibly the worst offenders in recent video game history. For many of the offensive ultimates there is exactly one reliable counterplay, and that is a defensive ultimate. For the defensive ultimates there is no counterplay. They're all essentially instant, and after they're used will essentially completely undo anything that might have happened before, or is currently in the process of happening. Lucio's and Mercy's ultimates also have massive range, and their effect goes through walls, so most of the time you can't even kill them before they blow their ulti, and then it's too late. Rather than true counterplay, what Overwatch really has would better be described as cooldown trading. This should be a familiar concept to people who have played something like World of Warcraft Arena. The gameplay revolves around trying to force your opponent to blow their lengthy cooldowns in a sub-optimal way, and then eliminating them once they have nothing left. Whether this was good gameplay in WoW is debatable, but it's definitely out of place in a fast-paced shooter. And regardless, Overwatch has way too few different cooldowns to play around to make this actually interesting. Another issue is the way some of the super important mechanics that define a well-rounded team are unique to a single character. This means that teams are generally forced to have those characters, or they will lack in key areas. Supports are by far the worst offenders here. Lucio and Mercy are both virtually necessary for any team in any scenario. Not only do they provide healing for their team, but they both also have game-changing ultimates that, like I mentioned before, are pretty much the only counterplay to many offensive ultimates. That's funny, it's almost like the ultimates are kind of a recurring theme when it comes to this game's problems. Let's break away from the character-related issues for a moment. The map design in this game is just something else. Some maps are actually almost alright, while the majority of them is just complete garbage.
Yeah, you got it.
There are too many choke points, too few alternate routes, and spawn points always seem to be either much too far from or much too close to the objective. The maps make it painfully obvious this is Blizzard's first FPS game. As things currently stand, they are also a critical thing for the game's future. Blizzard will either have to pump great maps out really fast, or release community mapping support, or else things will get very stale very quick. The final big issue is balance. Veterans of Blizzard's games won't be surprised by what I'm about to say. The game balance is horrible. A third of the cast is virtually unplayable at higher levels, while many heroes are powerful to the point of being necessary to have. The biggest concern is how Blizzard will approach fixing this. Right now it's too early to say for sure, and there is still room for optimism. However, the one balance patch they have released makes things look grim. It nerfed two heroes, McCree and Widowmaker. At the time, both of these heroes were staple picks in competitive play, and common but not quite as dominant on pub. The changes these heroes got completely gutted them, and now they see little to no play. If these nerfs are any indication of what's to come, the game's future doesn't look too bright. A balanced approach where you turn good characters into unplayable characters in a single patch belongs in League of Legends, not in an FPS game with only 20 odd heroes to go around. Overwatch is a very difficult game, not because it's actually challenging to play, but because I find it difficult to make up my mind on whether it's a flawed masterpiece or a completely unredeemable steaming pile of shit. When I first tried it, I took it for a dull, low skill cap casual shooter that did an outstanding job at marketing itself to the MOBA audience. After a little while of playing, I found myself genuinely enjoying a couple of the characters, to the point that those two characters alone sold the game to me. For some time I played happily under the illusion that hidden underneath the surface there was a half-decent shooter that did a great job at both being accessible by everyone and still being interesting to FPS veterans. Now that the ranked queue is out and I finally get to play against players close to my own skill level in an environment where everyone is doing their best to win, that illusion is starting to break. At this level, the game starts coming apart at the seams. Victory starts feeling like a matter of out-cheesing the opponent. It's like the game is no longer your skill versus the skill of your opponents, but rather your opponent's characters and cooldowns versus yours. As an FPS player, I just cannot appreciate this in a game that presents itself as a shooter. This is something I would expect from a MOBA, but Overwatch's abilities have nowhere near the mechanical complexity as those of a MOBA. This brings me to the unfortunate conclusion that the closing statement of my first video was probably fairly close to the truth after all. Overwatch can be a fun game, but if you are the kind of player who prefers it when countless of hours of mechanical practice pay off, it might not be the game for you.